and welcome to Left, Right and Centre. It is a day the world has dreaded, a day which could push Europe into a larger conflict, which would be the most horrific situation to hit Europe since the Second World War. Why? Because Russia has invaded Ukraine, and the implications of this for millions of people across the region could be catastrophic. On day one, a couple of very important questions need to be asked. What exactly has the impact of the Russian bombing been? How many people have actually lost their lives? There is no clarity or absolute truth from either Russia or from the Ukraine. But what is clear is this. Vladimir Putin said he would attack early this morning, and he's gone and attacked. And this is going to be a conflict which could stretch for the next couple of days unless there is a clear sign that Ukrainian soldiers may be wanting to surrender. So far, they are fighting very hard. The reason I mention this is because there's a message from Putin as well in all of this to Ukrainian forces: surrender and let's talk about peace. So far, there's nothing that's happened. And there are also signs that these Ukrainian forces have been taking out Russian tanks and armored personnel carriers. So there's this usual fog of war type situation at the moment. No one really knows what has been achieved on day one, other than the fact that the invasion has taken place. On this program, world powers impose sanctions. Is Russia going to at all be deterred by this? Because they're stepping up the sanctions. And what are India's challenges? Why is India important? Modi is going to be speaking to President Putin later tonight. And the Prime Minister has been holding a meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security. His biggest goal right now, figuring out a way to get 18,000 plus Indians out of Ukraine. I was on the flight of Air India, which was meant to get into Kiev to pull out people, but that flight actually turned back because the airport had been bombed by then. Let's take a look at the top developments today.
मेरा नाम आयशा शेख है। मैं यहाँ यूक्रेन में फंसी हुई हूँ। यहाँ पे इमरजेंसी सिचुएशन हो गई है। उन लोगों को हमारी लाइफ की कोई भी वैल्यू नहीं है। इवन इंडियन गवर्नमेंट को हमारी लाइफ की कोई भी वैल्यू नहीं है। इस सिचुएशन में भी उन लोगों ने एयर टिकट 60-70,000 की हुई है।
Air raid sirens go off in Ukraine's capital Kiev as Russia launches a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Before dawn, just as Russian President Putin announced a special military operation in Ukraine, the bombardment began in Ukrainian cities. People woke up to emergency sirens, explosions, smoke, and an announcement of martial law. The Russian invasion of Ukraine had begun soon after a televised speech by Russian President Vladimir Putin asking the Ukrainian troops to lay their arms and return home.
Its purpose is to protect people who have been subject to abuse and genocide by the Kiev regime for 8 years. And to do this, we will strive to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine.
The Russian president also warned West of dire consequences if it attempted to intervene.
Whoever tries to interfere with us, let alone create threats for our country, for our nation, must know that Russia's response will be immediate, and it will lead you to such consequences that you've never faced before in your history.
In Ukraine, people were asked to stay indoors and not venture out unless absolutely necessary.
Росія здійснила удари по нашій військовій інфраструктурі та по нашим прикордонникам, прикордонним загонам. В багатьох містах України було чутно вибухи. Ми вводимо воєнний стан на всій території нашої держави. Без паніки. Ми сильні, ми готові до всього. Ми всіх переможемо.
Shelling and missile strikes were reported across the country as Russia began an invasion from land and sea. The special military operation appeared to be an all-out blitzkrieg. Russian troops landed in the southern port city of Odessa, crossing from Russia to Kharkiv, the second largest city in the country. Russian military vehicles rolled from Crimea. Rockets also attacked Ukrainian fighter jets parked at an airport outside its capital Kiev. As air raid sirens blared, people rushed for cover in subway stations. Cars began to pile up as people rushed to fill gas in their vehicles. Ukraine closed its airspace. The country was in panic.
There have been explosions across Ukraine overnight as Russia begins the long-anticipated attack. Here in Kiev, in the capital, we heard a number of explosions off in the distance overnight that sort of jolted the city awake, and more recently, air raid sirens indicating that some of these attacks are getting closer.
To make matters worse, Russia's close ally Belarus joined the war, invading Ukraine from the north through intense artillery fire. And in the east, the Russian-backed rebels also began attacking Ukrainian forces. High-precision air and military strikes are being used to disable the Ukrainian air defense to pave way for an all-out ground assault. But what will be the collateral damage in terms of civilian casualties? An assessment can only be made when the sounds of war are silenced. An NDTV Bureau Report.
This actually gives you an idea of the areas where Russian forces have invaded Ukraine today. It started out in all the areas, but first let's look at the areas in the south. The area in the south, which is in red, is Crimea. It's been under Russian control since 2014. They went into the Ukraine from there. They then started moving to the east of that area itself. Let's just highlight those areas as well. Those are the areas in the south: Odessa, Crimea. Then further to the east in Donetsk, Luhansk, that's part of the Donbass region, which has been central to this entire area. And moving into that direction, moving west, remember Russia does control a part of that territory, but they want to push westwards even more. Then, of course, the most significant city over there, Kiev itself, which lies to the north. And to the east of Kiev, you can see the city of Kharkiv, not too far from the boundary with Russia. But Kiev itself is now very much the focus. Why? Because that is where there is an expectation that if the Russians are pushing for regime change, then they need to have soldiers on the ground, boots on the ground. Thus far, we have not seen that happening. We've not seen that happening. It doesn't mean it's not happening. There have been reports that the Russians have started breaching the outer perimeter of Kiev itself, coming in south from Belarus, which lies to the north. It's just a few hours' drive. Well, in all of this, the Prime Minister has been holding a meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security to look at the situation. Now, he's going to be speaking to President Putin. His primary concern at this stage would be to try and get those 18,000 Indians out of Ukraine. My colleague Arvind Gunasekara joins us for more on this. Arvind, any idea what the thrust of the Prime Minister's chat with the Russian President is going to be?
Vishnu, the all-important Cabinet Committee on Security meeting is currently underway at the residence of Prime Minister. So this very meeting started somewhere around 7:30 p.m. And it's well over 90 minutes and the meeting is still currently underway. So all senior ministers, including the Home Minister Amit Shah and also Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, along with External Affairs Minister Shankar and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and NSA Ajit Doval, all the senior executives, political executives, including the bureaucrats, are very much part of the meeting. So the meeting is well over 90 minutes and the meeting is still underway. So like you asked, three very important agenda on the table in this particular meeting. One, like you mentioned, almost over 15,000 people, including Indian citizens and including the students, are stranded in Ukraine. So the big concern for the government is to evacuate all those 15,000 students and also along with the other people, other Indians stranded in Ukraine. So that's first agenda. Second agenda is regarding the domestic issue. Because of this particular war, what will be the impact on domestically, including the economic front, whether even today the crude oil prices have already breached the $100 mark. So that is the second issue, the very important issue that has been discussed in today's meeting. And third is, like you mentioned, shortly from now, after this meeting, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be speaking with the Russian President Putin. What should be the India stand? That will also be discussed in this particular meeting. So what we are being told is that shortly after this particular meeting, the Finance Secretary, the Foreign Secretary will be addressing the media, where they would be detailing the steps that the government government will be taking in order to evacuate all those Indians stranded in Ukraine. So
All
we have
right.
to wait
All
for
right.
the readout from the Prime Minister office for this particular call.
Thanks, Arvind, very much for that. Well, I'm going to introduce my panel before I go across to Rajiv Gupta, who is our key guest this evening. I'm joined by the Ukrainian MP, Kira Rudik, Dmitry Solodov, spokesperson of the Russian Embassy here in Delhi, Ruslan Botnik, director of the Ukrainian Institute of Politics, Dr. Tara Karta, former director of the National Security Council Secretariat, Brahma Chilari, perhaps India's finest strategic affairs expert, Professor Anuradha Chinoy joins us, and later on I'll be joined by Meera Shankar. She's the former ambassador of India to the United States. But first, Rajiv Gupta, founder and managing director of the Kusum Group of pharmaceutical companies, which is the largest Indian company in the Ukraine. Mr. Gupta, what did you wake up to this morning?
Oh, today was a nightmare, you know. Let me first start our meeting with a smile, big smile, because parents of 20,000 Indians are in India who are worried. So be calm. No need to worry. If the students will be at home, I think there will be no problem. Hope so. You never know.
No, but
Nobody
you've been
was
doing some
expecting-
fantastic work, Mr. Gupta, for these students. You have been helping book hotel accommodation for these students, and you're doing this at your own expense, right?
No, not exactly what I am doing at present. You know, I am trying to get accommodation for as much as students as possible. We have done with previous ambassador, Mr. Rajiv Chandra. We have evacuated 12,000 students that time from Donetsk and Lugansk. Now I am trying to find some hotels, accommodation. But my appeal to all Indian parents, don't call too frequently to the students. They get panicked because they are also not having all the solutions.
Right.
Solution is not with them, not with me, not with anybody. Solution is with other part of the Ukraine.
Right. But
So,
Mr. Gupta, what exactly did you see this morning? You were an eyewitness to the
yeah,
attacks as they took
I
place.
waked up with a shelling. So we are having more than 1,200 employees in our company. So I start getting images from the different cities, how Russian army invades Ukraine. So one gentleman was telling in your show that Russia was not invading Ukraine. I think this is not correct.
Right.
We are like getting reports from my own employees, from colleagues, from the students, everywhere.
And what are
shelling
they
is-
seeing, Mr. Gupta? What are they
They
seeing?
can see the open fire Russian aircrafts are coming, or helicopters or missiles. So even in the city Sumy, 500 students got stuck. Heavy fighting is going on between Ukrainian and Russian army.
And in Kiev?
Kiev, time to time we are hearing some shelling. Air sirens are blowing time to time. We are going to the hideouts. I'm having in my house some parking space where I'm hiding when the sirens blow. We are expecting maybe the bridge Patona will be down very soon. So see, so many rumors are coming up. We cannot go with all the rumors, but the panic is there. That gentleman was telling that Russia is taking only Donetsk and Lugansk. I think probably this is not correct.
Okay.
Because shelling is all over the Ukraine.
All right. Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Gupta, for being with us. Let me just go across now to Kira Rudik. Kira Rudik, what exactly is Ukraine seeing in terms of casualties at this stage?
We don't have calculated casualties just yet. They coming up, and we're being very careful on taking every number, taking every fact, because what Russia
Your line is a bit bad. We'll try and we'll come back to you. Let me go across to Dmitry Solodov. Mr. Solodov, again, in terms of casualties, is there anything that Russia can confirm about your casualties at this stage?
Yes, of course, we can confirm that there are casualties among civilians in Donetsk and Lugansk.
Mm-hmm.
And those casualties have been counting since the Ukrainian army started shelling these regions.
Right. No, but what is the goal of Russia at this stage? Is it regime change?
Well, the goal of Russia is to save people of Donbass from that genocide that Ukraine have started long ago in 2014. You're saying that, we're hearing that Russia has started war. Actually, the civil war, was started by the Kiev regime in 2014. We're just assisting Donbas people to end this war.
No, but then why attack the rest of the country?
Well, with all due respect to Mr. Gupta, he told that he thinks that it is not like Mr. Babushkin said earlier. Well, there is a difference between thinking and being sure.
All right. Okay. All right. Kira Rudik joins us at this stage. Ma'am, you wanted to respond to that? Go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me right?
Yes, we can. It's clear. Go ahead.
Dmitry Solodov, you are lying. There is no civil war in Ukraine. There is Russia who attacked Ukraine and made full-scale invasion into our country. Your country is full of killers and your regime will fall down. You're starting the full-scale invasion. And what is happening now is not acceptable by the whole world, and you will pay for it.
Ms. Rudik, how bad has day one been? Has there been massive casualties among Ukrainians on the ground?
We are still calculating casualties because there is a huge disinformation attack from the Russian side. So I cannot give you exact number.
No, but approximate numbers.
It's less than 200 people right now. This is the approximate number. However, we see the Russian tanks, Russian airplanes, and Russian soldiers on our soil. How civil war is that?
Now, Dmitry Solodov, would you like to respond to that? Because this is a leading Ukrainian MP saying that essentially Russia is not saying the truth, that there are Russian tanks, Russian personnel on the ground. There is video to suggest this as well, sir.
Well, you see, there are no Russian troops on the ground. Those are Donetsk and Lugansk militia who are liberating their land from Ukrainian invasion, from Ukrainian aggression that has started in 2014. You are MP of Ukraine and you even don't know what is going on in your country.
I know exactly what is going on.
Who is Donbas people for you? Tell us.
I'm saying that it's coming from north, from Belarus. This is coming from south.
You see, they can only shout.
All the Russian troops
they have been shouting for 8 years.
You see it from the whole world seeing this right now. All the intelligences of the world are saying Russia is invading Ukraine. And you are still there to lie to people's face.
Mr. Solodov, could you please respond to that? These are very direct allegations on what Russia is doing. Please respond to that, sir.
I've already told what Russia is doing. This is a special operation for to assist Donbas people to liberate their land.
What the hell of the special operation you have to do in our country? Just go back to where you came from. Leave us alone. We are a free country. We don't want your troops on our soil.
Yes, by the way, I have a response for that. Russia is open for a diplomatic dialogue as well. This is not us who shut down the door, actually.
No, but Mr. Solodov, the point is that when the Ukrainian president called up President Putin, he didn't respond on the phone.
You see, there are lots of, for 8 years. Do you remember Minsk agreements? Do you know what is that?
Yes. Yes, I do know what it is, and I know the Russian argument is that it's collapsed.
Why was Ukrainian president calling my president?
Yes.
If Russia was not a state of a conflict, a part of a conflict, the Ukrainian president should have called the Donbas and Lugansk people for 8 years. He had 8 years to do that.
Let me bring in, Kira, I'll come back to you in a moment. Let me bring in an independent voice. Brahma Chelani, what is this about? What is the objective of President Putin? It's clearly not Donbass itself. It seems to be much more. That seems clear now.
Yes, Vishnu. What Russia has unveiled is its version of a shock and awe military campaign. This will be an extended military campaign, given that Putin has defined his war objective as demilitarizing Ukraine, which means regime change. Regime change will take time and will prove bloody for both sides. The irony is that in the Russian view, Ukraine is part of the historical heart of the Russian state, and its capital, Kyiv, is the cradle of the Russian civilization. Furthermore, Russia believes that Russians and Ukrainians are one people who have been arbitrarily separated by the anti-Russian policies of the present regime in Kyiv. So it's a paradox that Russia invades Ukraine. I think there's also a larger fundamental miscalculation on the part of successive US presidents since the 1990s. That miscalculation was that the US could expand NATO as eastward as it wanted without triggering Russian remilitarization or forcing Russia to pivot to China. The hostile backlash from Russia to
that is a policy which has failed 100%. That's absolutely clear. And
I'm sorry?
that's a policy, Dr. Chilani, that's clearly failed. The US response in the way that they've tried to extend NATO eastwards, and that has clearly triggered a Russian response. But Kira, let me ask you this, on the ground, from a humanitarian standpoint, because we've got friends, people telling us that they're hiding in metros right now, bunkers right now, they're stocking food, they're worried about water, etc., etc. What is the humanitarian situation in your areas, in the area that you're the MP for?
So I am currently at the capital of our country in Kyiv. The humanitarian situation here is quite okay. People are hiding in bomb shelters because we expect the attack from the air within the next 20 hours.
Yep.
And maybe earlier. And there has been attacks already during the day.
Yeah.
But people are provided with water and food. However, if there will be more hits from Russian army, we will not be able to sustain that.
All right. So that's.
But what we discuss is that now we want all the Western countries to unite and help Ukraine fight Russia back, to isolate it from the world.
Kira, do you feel that you've been let down by your Western partners?
We feel that we can get more support right now from all the partners.
Right.
Because what is happening now doesn't stand for sanctions.
Right.
It should stand for the open military fight back.
Right.
It should stand for the no-fly zone over Ukraine and total NATO help.
Right.
Because if Ukraine fails, Russia will invade Poland, like they did in 1939. There is like the old story for them.
Yep. Dr. Tara Katha, got it, Kira. Dr. Tara Katha, do you believe that India's policy of being independent, at this juncture is failing? Because how do you remain independent to what is being seen around the world as a blatant act of Russian aggression, one that in which Indians in Ukraine, 18,000 plus of them, are suffering right now. They can't get out, for starters. So do you not believe that despite our exceptionally good friendship with Russia, India needs to take a stronger position against Russia?
No, I think in such situations, the fact that India has a strong relationship with Russia should be seen as an advantage. And remember, such actions are taken quietly. It is not done in public. That by us coming out in public and condemning Russia, nothing is achieved. So there will be I am very certain that there is a very strong diplomatic, what shall I say, a back channel operating to get Russia to see reason. But the problem is we are not sure exactly what Russia wants.
Right.
Neither actually are we very sure what the West wants. Because as you know, some of the statements which have come out from the US, for example, has been extremely puzzling. I mean, there's been a official spokesperson who said, I think it was day before yesterday, who said that if Russia goes into these rebel regions, we may not result in sanctions. I mean, what kind of a statement is that? where you're virtually, in fact, I can read the actual statement where they seem to say that this would not invite very heavy sanctions. That's what an official spokesperson said.
Right. Yep.
So we are not clear what they are doing. We are not clear what Russia wants. And at the moment, so far as we know, there are no boats on the ground. He's talking of regime change. It seems to be a kind of in his speech, we have to admit, in Putin's speech, he's got a very passionate defense of what he's doing. And not all of it is wrong. Not all of it. Ukraine, the government is far from being democratic. Let's admit that as well. But does that mean Russia should invade? No. Let's be very clear on that. There are all kinds of countries, they're doing a lot of things. There are other ways of responding. You don't invade a country, right? That is simply unacceptable.
Right. I just want to go across to Professor Anuradha Chinoy, who joins us as well. Ma'am, I'm just going to delay that because the Foreign Secretary is speaking. Let's listen in.
And of course, they've been following the developments over the last few days. So today, we have had the privilege of having with us Foreign Secretary Shri Harshvardhan Shringla to talk to us about our primary focus of the government today, which is on the safety and security of the Indian nationals and their evacuation from Ukraine. I will request Foreign Secretary Sir to make few brief opening remarks, and after that we'll take some questions. So over to you, sir.
Namaskar and good evening. Thank you for joining us at this late hour. You have all seen the sudden and serious developments in Ukraine today. As we speak, there is a meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security, chaired by the Prime Minister in session, to take stock of this situation. Prime Minister has conveyed at the CCS meeting that the topmost priority of the government is the safety and security of Indian nationals, including Indian students, and their evacuation from Ukraine. Prime Minister is scheduled to speak to the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, shortly. External Affairs Minister will be speaking to the foreign ministers of the countries neighboring Ukraine, namely Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and Hungary. Earlier this evening, he also spoke to the EU High Representative as well as the Foreign Minister of the UK. A number of steps have been taken over the last month or so to deal with the emerging situation in Ukraine, including the contingencies that could arise, and I'm referring to the situation as we see today. We started the registration of Indian nationals in the Ukraine about a month ago. Our embassy anticipated the need to connect and be in contact with all Indian students in the Ukraine. Based on the online registration process that was conducted by our embassy, we found that there were close to about 20,000 Indian nationals, including students in the Ukraine. Of these, about 4,000 have since left the country. We have taken a number of measures to facilitate flights out of the country. This includes removing the cap on the number of passengers that could fly out of Ukraine that was imposed by the civil aviation authorities of both countries. There was a 440 numbers that could fly out every week. That cap was removed. We also ensured that the number of flights were augmented rapidly from about twice a week to about 2 flights a day. And that enabled us to get at least 4,000 of our citizens and students out. We should also remember that there were a number of other options available through flights to Dubai and Istanbul and other places from Kyiv. Our embassy in Ukraine continues to be functional, is rendering all assistance possible to Indian nationals there, notwithstanding the fairly complicated and evolving situation that we find ourselves in. The embassy has issued a number of advisories in recent days. Today itself, the embassy has issued 3 advisories, and these provide advice to Indian nationals on the situation as it evolves, travel towards safer places, including western parts of the country that will facilitate the exit by road and other means, safety precautions that our citizens could take, etc. Our ambassadors also sent a personal message to all Indian citizens in Ukraine, providing advice. We are consulting universities, student contractors in the process of providing for the welfare and safety of our students. A control room has been set up in MEA. Now this control room has been functional for the past 7 or 8 days, but we have seriously augmented the strength. We have over 20 officers that are manning these control rooms, this control room in the Ministry of External Affairs on a 24/7 basis. Just to give an example, till now and just today, we have answered 980 calls and dealt with some 850 emails that were sent to this control room. Our embassy in Kiev has also set up a helpline, 24/7 helpline center. The other measure that we have taken is that we have dispatched Russian-speaking officers to Kiev and to the countries neighboring Ukraine. Russian-speaking because the language there is Russian. If you're not Russian-speaking, your utility is far more limited. Some of these officers are already reached and are functioning. Some will be reaching shortly. We've also asked our embassies, our ambassadors in the countries neighboring Ukraine, and I mentioned these, Poland, Romania, Slovakia and Hungary, to send teams of their officers to the border areas with Ukraine to facilitate the exit of Indian nationals from Ukraine, to permit them to come into their countries, so where they can be safely evacuated back to India. And MEA teams are on their way as we speak to Zahoni border post in Hungary, Krakwiers land border in Poland, Visny Nemke in Slovak Republic, and Suceava land border in Romania. We have also asked some of our officers to go across and set up camp offices in Ukraine, close to the border. Two of the places we have identified are Lviv, which is close to Poland, and Chernivtsi, which is close to Romania. And here, I think, will be sort of facilitation points. Now, our embassy has, it's a very complicated, very evolving situation. It's obviously, certain areas there's conflict. We can't have a single sort of advisory that fits all situations. We have to evolve. We have to see where we are and how and which part of the country are located and what the situation is. Generally, if we are advising that if you find yourself in a certain difficult situation, then you should remain in secure areas and shelters, etc. If you can, you move westwards towards the borders with some of the countries I mentioned. And these advisories will be continuously issued. These helplines are for that purpose, so that depending on the situation, that advice can be given. One important step that we have taken, because a number of our students were reluctant to leave because the authorities, university authorities had said that the classes must be offline. We have now persuaded all the universities and institutions to allow online classes, and therefore students can actually leave without having to face the strain of not being able to or missing out on their classes. As I said, the situation on the ground is difficult and is rapidly evolving. I want to take this opportunity to assure all Indian citizens, including students in Ukraine and their family members, that we will take all possible steps to bring you back safe and sound, bring your wards back safe and sound. Prime Minister has specifically stated that the Ministry of External Affairs should do everything possible in coordination, of course, with other ministries involved to ensure that facilitation on the lines that I discussed, helplines, control rooms, officers available, shelters, accommodation, facilitation in every manner is done for our citizens. We, of course, had a few citizens outside our embassy also. I'm told that at least all of them, I'm talking about numbers of about 200 to 250 of our citizens, have been accommodated in schools in the area. The embassy has been asked to facilitate their requirements, and depending on the situation, we will have them evacuated westwards. As you know, this government has been very focused when it comes to the welfare of Indian citizens in difficult situations around the world. We have had a lot of experience in facilitating and arranging such evacuations. The Vande Bharat mission, which is the largest repatriation exercise of its kind, was undertaken during the peak of COVID times. More recently, we had Op Devi Shakti, which is involving the evacuation of Indian nationals from Afghanistan, from a conflict situation. We will obviously have to take into account that every situation presents its own challenges, and we have to deal with it accordingly. So perhaps I'll stop here and see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Please introduce yourselves before taking the questions. Maybe I'll start with you right here. I saw your hand go first, and then we'll...
Sir, I'm Akhilesh Suman from Sansar TV. Russia and the US both are strategic partners, and in this point of time, are we playing any role talking to both US and Russia to stop the war and create a situation when there can be a congenial atmosphere in the region?
Take a few more. A couple of more. Yeah, please. Come back.
So would you like to make any comments on the sanctions being imposed on Russia? Does that bring more difficulty for us as far as our military acquisitions are concerned? Thank you. Nainima from Ukraine.
So my question is regarding India's consistent position when it comes to countries' territorial sovereignty regarding this invasion of countries' territorial sovereignty is being violated. What does New Delhi has to say on that? I'm Siddhant from Beyond.
Fourth.
Meera from DD News. Sir, some states have also set up control rooms. So is the MEA coordinating with the state control rooms as well? Where do those people who reach out to state control rooms, does it reach the MEA? How does it work?
I'll take one last one. Okay. I'll come back to it.
So Hasini Heather from the Hindu. Foreign Secretary, we know that, as you said, there have been conversations between the EM, the European Union counterparts, the UK as well. I wanted to just touch on Nainima and Siddhant's questions on the UN Security Council resolution that the US says it is going to bring. Has India seen a draft of the resolution that is coming about? So far, India has the statements India has made have not criticized Russia, have referred to legitimate security interests of all parties, and has not actually affirmed the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So I just wanted to know if India's position on any of these is likely to change given this UNSC resolution.
So let us start with Akhilesh's question, which is, whether we are playing any role with our strategic partners. It is true that India has maintained the best of relations with all countries concerned, whether it's the United States, whether it's Russia, or whether it's the European Union. We have been in touch with all parties concerned, as you can imagine, both as a member of the Security Council, as a country with a lot at stake in that region, as a country with so many of its citizens in a vulnerable zone. We have been in close touch with all concerned. External Affairs Minister was in Europe recently, where he's had a number of meetings with his interlocutors. This evening, as I said, Prime Minister will be speaking to President Putin. External Affairs Minister himself has spoken to a number of ministers from the European Union, and will be speaking to those ministers, those of his counterparts who are from neighboring countries, which is very important, primarily for our own citizens and their safe evacuation out of Ukraine. So our focus in the UN Security Council has always been on de-escalation of tensions, on diplomatic dialogue as the only way forward, and we've also emphasized on the existing agreements, the Minsk agreements, the Normandy format. We've also obviously placed the highest importance to the safety and security of our nationals in the Ukraine in our statements in the UN Security Council. And so in all of this, I think we have, as I said, maintained that people need to talk to each other, the parties need to be engaged, and if there's anything that we can do to facilitate that engagement, we are more than happy to do. And I think, as we go along, we will try and be as helpful as possible. Nayanima's question on sanctions on Russia, you're aware that certain unilateral sanctions were already existing as far as Russia was concerned. Some additional sanctions have been imposed by the United States, by the EU, by Australia, Japan, the UK, among others. But this is an evolving situation, as I said, and we have to see what sort of impact these sanctions will have on our own interests. Clearly, we need to study this carefully because any sanctions will have impact on our existing relationship. I think it would only be correct to acknowledge that factor, but the actual impact of the sanctions needs to be studied carefully, and we will do that. Siddhant, I think you spoke about the country's sovereignty. I think that question was also asked by Suhasini when you talked about our position in the Security Council, the possibility of a UNSC resolution that would be tabled on the evolving situation. We have seen a draft resolution. I'm told that that would undergo considerable changes. We will wait to see the shape that this resolution takes before we can pronounce ourselves on the position that we would take on this issue. So it is, as I said, an evolving situation both on the ground and in the United Nations. We are at the cutting edge of many of the issues, many of the areas where these issues will be discussed and will be considered by the international community. And we will certainly play our due role in that regard. Yes, yes. So, excuse me. I think Neeta had asked this question about state control rooms. I can tell you that a number of chief secretaries of states have spoken to me. Obviously, states are concerned about students, about citizens from their states who are in Ukraine. We are coordinating very closely in that regard. It's only fair to tell you that we have set up, control rooms and teams all over. We have set up the control rooms in Hungary, in Poland, in Slovakia, and Romania. All this information is out in the public domain. But early in the day, whoever contacted me, I immediately sent out the details to them in our state governments. Our external publicity division has put all this out in the public domain. And all this is information that our states can use. We are, as I said, in close touch with all concerned who have a stake in this issue, whether it is parents, whether it is family members, or whether it is state governments, members of parliament, those who are concerned about this. And I just mentioned, Prime Minister chaired a meeting, is chairing a meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security. They are examining all aspects of the situation, in particular, what sort of assistance, what sort of support that we can render to our citizens in this time of need. And clearly,
All right, the Foreign Secretary speaking primarily on how India has stepped up a whole lot of steps to try and get the 18,000 plus Indian citizens, nationals out of the Ukraine at this stage. Professor Anuradha Chinoy has been listening in on that. To the larger question on whether India needs to do more in condemning this Russian move, do you believe the Foreign Secretary said enough?
Well, look, I think India has taken a good position of, it shows strategic autonomy. They have not bent to the pressure from the United States and neither from Russia. So, and they have seen, I think they have weighed it very carefully that all the parties involved in this, whether it's Russia, the United States, the EU and NATO and Ukraine, they have all led to this conflict. For 7 years, there has been a civil war. There's no doubt about it. Russian ethnic minorities have, been alienated. They have wanted to secede. Crimea seceded first. Donetsk and Luhansk have seceded. They had controlled that area, and Ukraine obviously wanted it back.
Right.
So Russia saw this. Putin has a priority of saving ethnic Russians in the countries they found themselves. One. Secondly, Russia, for the last more than 20 years, has been resisting NATO expansion. They have always said, do not do it, but NATO has expanded and there are missiles in all these 14 new NATO members who were formerly part of the Soviet bloc.
Yeah.
So they feel excluded in this, and Russia is seen as a threat. They've been asking to be included in some kind of security architecture within Europe. The talks, whether it was Minsk 1, 2, all the Paris agreements, they have all failed, primarily because NATO wants its way and it has not tried to have any kind of equal relationship with Russia or incorporate them in any
Right,
kind
ma'am,
of
I'm just
dialogue.
interrupting because I need to take a short break at this stage. Thanks very much for sharing that perspective. Coming up in just a few moments, Ambassador Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, for her perspective on what exactly has been happening. A couple of questions first on coup. Anand Kumar writes in, says, the West imposes swift sanctions on Russia. Can they stop a war? Samir Thakur says Putin must be aware about the consequences from the world, but he has no fear. We'll take a short break, come back with Ambassador Shankar. Well, joining us now, Ambassador Meera Shankar, former India's former ambassador to the United States. Thank you, ma'am, very much for being with us. Where do you think this is going to end? Is this about Ukraine and Ukraine alone, or does Putin have an intention to further this, perhaps return to a Cold War sort of formulation with frontline states?
I don't think so, because I would imagine that Putin has a greater sense of realism with regard to the situation in Europe. What he is trying to convey and has been trying to convey for some time, either through diplomacy or through his statements and now through the use of force, is that the security structure which emerged in Europe after the collapse of the Soviet Union was predicated on Russian weakness and exploited it. Russia's security interests were not respected or given equal weightage by the West. And therefore, what he's saying is that while we may not be back to the Soviet Union, we are no longer that old, weak Russia, which is just going to sit and tolerate our red lines being crossed. So in some sense, he's signaling the need to have a more sustainable and equitable security arrangement in Europe, which would contribute to greater stability in the region and be the basis for a more stable relationship between these two great powers, the USA and Russia.
And ma'am, are you satisfied personally with India's, being right in the middle? We have relations with Ukraine and with Russia, but in a situation like this, when one country is invaded another, shouldn't India be taking a stance against Russia?
Well, I think you can't see the events in Ukraine. Yes, it is against international law, and clearly if all countries start following this kind of assertion of their perceived interests, it would lead to anarchy in the global sphere. But I think you can't see these events in isolation of what happened post the collapse of the Soviet Union and Russia's constant insistence that NATO should not expand eastward, their understanding that they were given assurances that this will not happen, but then the Warsaw Pact countries joined NATO, and finally, former Soviet republics, Georgia and Ukraine, who had applied for NATO membership, were put on the wait list in 2008. And then you saw Putin intervening in Georgia, where Russian troops are still there in two enclaves. And then when Ukraine happened, when in 2013-14, the Orange Revolution, and the pro-Russian government was overthrown in Ukraine, you saw him intervene in Crimea and annex Crimea. So he's been making it fairly clear that this is something which threatens, he perceives as threatening Russian security directly, and Russia will act to safeguard its interests as it perceives it. Now, clearly, that's not the US view of the situation, because they take the view that how can you tell sovereign countries which alliances they can or cannot join. But let me take you back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the US had deployed missiles in Turkey, just below Russia, and Russia deployed nuclear missiles, not Cuban missiles, nuclear missiles in Turkey, and Russia had deployed nuclear missiles in Cuba. And then eventually, because this was leading to a very tense nuclear standoff between these two powers, they both agreed to withdraw. The US did it clandestinely and secretly. Kennedy agreed to withdraw the US missiles in Turkey, and Russia, then Soviet Union, agreed to withdraw their missiles in Cuba. Now, this was based on the understanding that a more stable nuclear deterrent and a more stable relationship between these two nuclear powers was desirable, and that a nuclear face-off or even a military face-off between them directly could lead to an uncontrollable situation, which would put the whole global security into jeopardy. So what I'm trying to say is that countries have autonomy, but then they also have to look at the geopolitical situation with which they are confronted and how they can manage that. And in this instance, when NATO and the US had made it quite clear that they are not going to send forces into Ukraine on the ground to assist Ukraine, more realistic diplomacy could have prevailed.
Sure. Ma'am, I'm just interrupting over there because I need to take a break. More coming up.